Hello everyone, this is Greg. How are you this evening? I just wanted to talk to you for a minute. We'll do this every week. We'll go over what happened in the last week and then what to look forward in the next week and let you know that there's a real person out here helping you through all this. This is my little office at home where I work out of. So the first thing we need to talk about is it was a good week. Everybody seems to be off to a pretty good start. And it was a week of general theories as to what's good scientific thinking and what's not. Now, next week becomes a little bit different, and you start identifying the principles of science as applied to quantitative research. And the one that I indicated to you, which is most important to me, is what's called falsifiability. And you should look that up and spend some time with it. That's what we do primarily in quantitative research, is we falsify hypothesis in order to find something that's more likely to be true. So you're asked to do two things in the assignment this week, and that is to work on a general research question that interests you. Now, let me explain. There's a difference between a research question and a testable hypothesis. So that needs to be made clear, and people kind of confuse those. Every dissertation has 3 or 4 research questions that are being answered, and then testable hypothesis, in which you run a statistical test to see if you can refute the null hypothesis in favor of the alternative. So let me give you a few examples. A research question, I call it an RQ, might be, is there a relationship between number of minutes per week of parental involvement and GPA? So that's a research question. It's generally asking about a relationship between two variables, and it's pretty specific. Now, the null hypothesis, which would accompany that research question, would be stated to some extent: there is no correlation between the GPA and the number of minutes per week of parental involvement. So a null hypothesis is very specific, and that you run a statistical test, in this case a correlation, to see if there is a correlation between those two variables, and if so, and it's strong enough, then you reject the null hypothesis in favor of the alternative. So what you're saying is that there very well could be a correlation between number of minutes per week of student involvement and GPA. So difference between research question and testable null hypothesis. Okay, what are poor research questions? Well, how about this? How does participation in counseling relate to kindness? All right, well, there's two issues here. First of all, what we'll be doing, I think it's next week, you have to operationalize counseling. What is counseling? Is that talking to your friend? Is that number of minutes spent with a certified therapist? It would have to be something that you could operationalize and then measure. The same thing with kindness. You would have to operationalize it and measure. So when you say how does it relate to, what do you exactly mean by how does it relate? Is there a correlation between two scales? Is the mean amount of kindness of people who are in counseling higher than the mean amount of kindness of people who are not in counseling? So that's not a good research question. It's a little unclear. Another one, does student discussion positively correlate with academic achievement? Now, that's not too bad, but you have to then operationalize academic achievement. How are you going to measure that? And how are you going to measure student discussion? So there's variables that have to be operationalized there. Here's another good research question. Are there differences in achievement based on your geographical location? Now that's pretty specific. Okay, so that's clear as to what that means. The null hypothesis that would accompany that is there is no difference in the mean score on the 8th grade state assessment between 8th graders in Nebraska and 8th graders in Kansas. Now that can be tested specifically. And the first statistical test we'll do is what's called an independent two-sample t-test, which tests to see if there's a difference in means of two populations. So and we'll talk more about that next week. So this week we'll be focused on good research questions and writing good null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. So let's go back to falsifiability. What we try and do in quantitative research is take what's called a null hypothesis, which there is no difference in the mean score on the state assessment for 8th graders in Kansas and Nebraska. And then we run a statistical test on two samples and see if there's evidence to reject that in favor of an alternative hypothesis, which is that there is probably a difference in the mean score of the groups between the two states. So that gives us understanding about the phenomenon. Now we can't prove that, but we know that there's evidence for it, and we build that evidence through rejecting null hypotheses. That's how the quantitative method works. Okay, so in the same sense, a little different sense, Newton told us that we know that there is no actual force such as gravity that reaches out and pulls another planet to us. We know that's not true. Now, we don't actually know what gravity is. That has to do with general relativity, but we know it's not a force that reaches out and pulls on other objects. So science advances understanding through falsification of hypotheses in favor of a better explanation. And that's a little bit about what we do in quantitative research. So that's our real focus this week, is research questions and hypotheses that can be tested. So we'll go into that a little bit more next week. So I think it's been a good week. The only thing I'd like to ask is that, and everybody seems to be pretty prompt on turning the assignments in. I appreciate that. The only reason for that is if people get behind, then it's hard to give you feedback and then focus on the next week. So just keep me posted, and I really appreciate it. The other thing is, make sure you have your SBSS running, because that's coming up, I think, in week 3 or 4, where you have to do your first SBSS calculation. So I'm going to show you how that works right now. When you have SBS running on a PC, won't run on a Chromebook, it has to have a Mac, then when you open it up, it's going to look like this. And as you can see, I put about 10 numbers in column 1. 10 numbers in column 1. And what you should try and do this week, I don't think it's an assignment, but you should go to, once you put the $10 in there, analyze descriptives, select descriptives, put variable 1 in the white box. Oh, there it is, variable 1 in the right box, a little closer. Okay. Put variable 1 in the right box, and then click OK, and it will give you the mean, median, mode, and standard deviation of that set of numbers. And that's the first assignment that I think you have to do. So get comfortable with using your SPSS, and I'm going to walk you through how all the calculations are made, but you should start practicing with it now. So that's about all I have to say. We keep our YouTube videos under 10 minutes, otherwise we end up, I think you have to pay YouTube, but we'll do this every week to clarify things and to get you ready for the next week. So good meeting, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.